Hey folks, welcome back to another Dice Tower preview. I'm Mark, and today we're taking a look at Wroth, which is brought to you by Chip Theory Games. It's for 1 to 4 players ages 13 and up, and games generally run about 60 minutes. The Drudgen Peninsula has known only war for centuries. Factions marshal their troops for battle to control the peninsula's plateaus. Masses of foot soldiers and spear carriers cross plains and waves to fight. They travel alongside their chiefs, officers, seers, masters, and lords, as varied as their cultures and homelands. Why this age-old conflict? Webs of animosities, betrayals, and mutual loathing, as fresh as the rain and as barely remembered as the beginning of the world. For whatever reasons, this peninsula has known only war for centuries, and this day will be no different. Wroth is an area-controlled game that can be played competitively, cooperatively, or solo. You can choose a faction and vie for control of the island of Wroth by drafting action dice to gain resources, deploying and moving troops, and attacking the opposition, all while trying to hold key positions and dominate the region. Wroth rewards cunning, troop management, and the clever use of your faction's elite troops and powerful once-per-game abilities. The game ends when one faction reaches 40 victory points or completes a scenario-based mission, depending on the game mode. So right out of the gate, I just have to tell you up front that I am very excited about this game. Manny Tremblay is one of my favorite board game artists, as well as what he does with games in general, I just love. And teaming up with Chip Theory Games, another one of my favorite publishers, this is definitely something that's going to appeal to me. Now, again, this is a prototype. You need to bear that in mind. Even though it looks so beautiful here on the table, I'm going to show you some close-ups of the neoprene mats and things, and some of the text may not seem as clear as it should be. Well, again, yes, this is a prototype, so bear that in mind. So everything about this game right now is just going to look even better when it's finally released. So, knowing all that ahead of time, I'm going to dive in and show you this game as an overview, give you a feel for it, and see if it's something you want to jump into. And one of the neat things is that I really like, again, player aids. If you watch my videos, you know I love player aids. I did a great job with this one. Just the rounds, the turns that you're going to be doing in the game, as well as all the iconography on the other side. Really nice. And especially for the prototype, it really helped dive in and just learn the game. So a lot of neat things here. Again, the game has several different modes. You have your PvP, which is kind of the standard game, and those are the basics that we're going to go over. But I love the fact that there's a cooperative version and a solo version, but the cooperative version you can play together against an AI component, and you have scenarios and things that you're going to be diving into. I only had one to jump into, but that's definitely, I can see being one of my favorite ways to play. Taking a closer look at the map, you'll see it's divided into regions, and each of these regions is going to have a region value token in it, which is randomized every game. These tokens are going to be designated by numbers and symbols, and the numbers are going to represent victory points if you have area control, and then there'll be symbols on these that might get you resource or actions, things like that. And the main resource in this game is Cora. It's a mystical currency. It powers everything that you do with your factions in the game. Now, each player will take control of one of these amazing factions. They all have unique powers and abilities. You have basic troops and you have elite troops. Now, you have 25 of these basic troops, and as you put them into play and they're destroyed, they're out of the game. But your elite troops, which are represented by dice, will be ticking down their values until they're removed from the board, but they just come back to your player board, and you can purchase them or use the quorum to bring them back into the game. And the health values of the troops are very straightforward. So if you're basic troops, it's 1 health and they're eliminated. However, your elite troops are going to be very different for each of the factions, and it's based on the dice, obviously, and how high of a level the dice is for that particular troop. So you're going to be doing all kinds of things with these, and they really chain into each other in what they're doing. Also, each of these factions have a unique one-time power. You can use it once per game. It is this card that goes along with your player board. So you want to use this power wisely because, again, you can only use it one time. Now, each of the factions, each player is also going to receive an all-seeing dice. We'll talk about the actions in a minute, but you're going to be rolling this at the top of the round. It basically gives you a free action during the course of play for that round, because the main bulk of your actions are going to come from a dice pool based on the number of players, and you're going to be rolling those and then drafting those dice to determine what actions you're going to have available for that particular round. So Wroth is played in a series of rounds, and each round consists of 6 phases, the first phase being the spoils. Now, again, this is an area control game, so spoils only happen if you have control of a zone that has a symbol in it. So again, each of these deployment tokens are going to have numbers and symbols. Numbers don't come into play yet, only the symbols do. First we have mine, where you're just going to get 1 core if you have control of that area. Then we have extend, and extend is just going to allow you to deploy 2 troops from your player board to a zone that you already have troops in. It's really that simple. You're kind of just bolstering it. And then we have maneuver, where you can deploy from your player board to the deployment zone. And there are these zones around the board that are kind of your starting position. You're not going to be battling in these zones, but this is where you can start to bring your troops in order to move them out across the map. So that's one of the options. Or you can take troops in a zone that you already occupy and move them to the adjacent zone. It's really that simple. It's maneuver. And then finally, battle. You can attack in a zone that you're in for 1 damage, basically removing a basic troop or moving down the dice of an opponent to a lower level. Or simply, you can attack in an adjacent zone as well. So those are the basics around what you're doing for those different areas and this whole spoils that you're going to be doing throughout each round. Phase 2 is laying the groundwork. First thing you're doing is taking 2 of your troops and putting them in your deployment zone. Then you're going to be rolling your all-seeing dice to see what that kind of freebie action is for that particular round. And then you're going to be grabbing 1 core to add to your pool. Phase 3 is the draft. This is where you'll take all the action dice, and based on player count, will determine how many you're rolling, plus 1. You'll roll those, and in turn order, you will then take a dice until each player ends up with 2. And then the player who has the least amount of victory points is going to get the extra dice. So they'll have 3 possible actions on their turn. Phase 4 is about taking those actions, and you've already seen most of them in the spoils phase. So all those will be available to you that we talked about before, as well as one other called Exodus. And again, some of these names for these actions might change in the final game, but Exodus just allows you to take as many troops as you want from any zone and move them to another. So they're maybe in their deployment zone, and you start to spread them into adjacent zones from there. So it's a great way to move out a bunch of troops or move a bunch of troops into one zone. So on your turn, you'll take a look at your available action dice. You get to perform one of those actions and then discard the dice, showing that it was taken, and it'll move around the table from there. But you have other options available to you. You can instead not take the action from the dice, instead spin the dice to deploy a single troop to your deployment zone. Or you could take 2 of your dice and use them as wild actions, which you can consult the chart at the top of the scoreboard showing the available wild actions. Now you're going to start the game where Exodus is covered, the one we just talked about. And all the other actions will be available to you, but whatever action you take, that is what will be covered for the next person who might take a wild action. So it just gives you some options. Maybe you didn't get quite the dice you needed, but this way you can mix and match some different ways of approaching it. Now you can also spend quorum to deploy one of your elite troops to the board. And you have, again, each of the factions are going to have very different ways of doing that and different types of dice. So you have to be very mindful about what you're doing and what you're looking at here, but there'll be a cost in quorum related to those elite troops. Or you may choose to use your all-seeing dice. Again, this is a freebie action, doesn't cost against your action pool of dice. And some neat things here for sure. You can simply just mine Fakora, or you can strike, doing 1 damage to anywhere on the map. Or you can have an assault, which allows you to do 2 damage to the zone you're in or an adjacent zone, so helping you thin the herd, so to say. And then finally you have a second, which might be my favorite because this can be applied to the action dice that you just took, and you can take that action for a second time. Really, really powerful. Now, phase 5 is all about gathering the victory points. You're going to take a look at the map and you're going to round in zone order and see who has the most troops. Whoever does is going to get the victory points that's shown on the tokens that were placed out at the start of the game. So might be some hotly contested spots here, like there is one that's a 3, and you potentially get 3 victory points. But if you have dominance, you're the only faction there, you'll get an extra victory point. And then you have to also be mindful about all your elite troops. They may be in play, which allow you to get even more victory points in a zone. So again, this is an area control game, and you're after the dominance, you're after control in order to get those victory points throughout the course of the game. It's a great way to keep the score running and the tally up. And again, whoever has the least number of victory points in that next round is going to get an extra action dice. So it's not always bad to be trailing for a little while. And it is interesting, the tug of war that happens on this victory point score. Really some nice back and forth through the whole course of the game. And then finally, phase 6 is just about moving the first player marker around the table, and then you're going to be starting back at the top of the round. And of course, if a player has hit level 40 or more on the victory point track, the game will come to an end. Now, let's take a closer look at one of these factions. We're not going to dive into each of them, but just know that all their powers and naming conventions, everything about them are very unique. So how they name their basic troops and how they name their elite troops, and just the different powers available to you. Now, starting with my favorite so far, we have the ALDAN, and it is kind of an elf-looking race. And you'll see they have 2 levels of elite troops. Now, they have varying cost here. The first one's going to cost you 2 Cora, the next one is 1 Cora, and finally their special ability, Volley, will cost you 2 Cora. It is not a troop, but instead it's a special ability, which I love, firing a volley of arrows. Now, that first one, I think it's called Elegant. That particular troop, that elite troop, has a level 3 value on it when you bring it out and deploy it, but it can also bring one of the basic troops with it. And if it's in a zone that you control, then you'll get an extra victory point because it is there. The next elite troop is the Winden. They only cost you 1 Cora, and they have a level 2 value, but you get to deploy them into a zone that you control, which is really nice. And they will give you an extra victory point as well, but you can't deploy them unless you already have an Elegant out in the world already. And then finally, we have our Volley, one of my favorite things. Again, you can tack a zone you're in, a region you're in, or an adjacent region, which is really nice, for 2 damage. This will cost you 2 Cora in order to launch this Volley, but the prerequisite here is that you have 1 of each type of your elite out in the world. So it really is fantastic. I love Volley. I used it quite a bit in my game. Now, the ALDAN's one-time big powerhouse move. Again, you can only use this once per game, and once you do, you'll flip your card over. But this card allows you to hit each region for 2 damage. So definitely for all these different main big powers, you might save them to the end of the game or a crucial moment in order to swing the victory points in your direction for sure. So that just gives you a flavor of one of the different type of factions, but just know that they do very different things, like I said. And definitely the cooperative game too. I love that there's a scenario base and how you kind of team up to work against the AI component. So lots of neat things about this game for sure. All right, folks, just a reminder once again, this has been a Dice Tower paid preview, and everything you've seen here has been in prototype form, so keep a close eye on the campaign for any changes that still may occur. Now, with that said, again, the game is just simply beautiful, and I like the strategy and tactics in this game, but I love dice pool in games where you're rolling a bunch of dice and you have to draft them and so forth. That is something that appeals to me. But again, just a lot of neat factions in this game, a lot of different ways to play, and I can't wait to try more of the cooperative version of the game. That's something that I find very intriguing. All the different scenarios and objectives that you have to do within that is going to be something I find really fun, I suspect. So folks, ultimately, if this looks like something of interest to you, I'm sure they'd appreciate your support. So I think that's it from me, and until next time, we'll see you at the table.